Hello and welcome to Children's Church. We've been going through stories from the New Testament. And last week we talked about when Jesus was at the well in Samaria and he met the woman and told her life story, and then all of the people in the town came to believe. Well, after he had spent a couple of days in Samaria, Jesus left that area and went up into Galilee, where he was going to be spending some time. Now, Jesus was really kind of troubled in his heart because he knew the people of Galilee well enough to know that they just weren't going to believe what God had to say to them. They would have to see some miraculous sign for them to believe. And that's not what God was about. He's not about showing off. Jesus was there to teach about God's love. But as he was coming near Nazareth, the town where he grew up, one of the royal officials came to Jesus and said, please, you've got to help me. My son is very sick. And he was sick. He was so sick, in fact, that if something didn't change, he was going to die. And so the royal official was pleading with Jesus, please come to my house and heal my son. And Jesus just said to him, he said, you people you won't believe unless you can see a miraculous sign. And the leader said, but please, Jesus, if you don't do something, he'll die. And Jesus looked at the official and said, be at peace. Your son will not die. He'll live. He'll be fine. And the leader looked at Jesus and believed. And he turned and left and went to go to his house. And as he was on his way, one of his servants was coming to get him. And so they kind of met in the road. And his servant said, good news, your son's fine. He got better. And the royal official said, what time did he get better? And the servant thought about it. Well, about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Why? And the royal official suddenly understood that was the exact time when Jesus said, your son won't die, he'll get better. And the royal official and all of his house believed. Now, Jesus went into Nazareth, the town where he grew up, and how exciting that would be to go see the places where you were when you were a small child and see all the people you've known all your life. And so Jesus was staying in the town, and he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as was custom. And, well, they would always have someone be the person who would read the scriptures. And, well, since Jesus was there and hadn't been there for a while, they wanted him to read. So they handed him the prophet, the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. And Jesus unrolled it, and he came to the spot he was looking for. Isaiah 61, verse 1. And Jesus read, the Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. And he sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, and recovery of sight for the blind, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And Jesus stopped, and he rolled up the scroll, and he handed it back to the attendant. And then he just sat down. And the entire synagogue is just staring at him, waiting to hear what he would say next. Because after you would read it, it would be customary to give some explanation. And Jesus said, today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. And everyone looked at each other and they were in shock to hear him say that, because it was wonderful to hear, but they started murmuring amongst themselves, wait, isn't that Joseph and Mary's son? Didn't he grow up with us? Don't you remember when he used to run down the street as a little boy? He's saying he's the promised one, the Messiah? And Jesus said, oh, I know what you'll say to me. You'll probably quote the proverb, physician, heal yourself. He said, a prophet is never honored in his own hometown, people who knew him when he was small. He said, I tell you the truth, in the days of Elijah, there were many widows who were starving when the rain quit falling from the sky. It didn't rain for 3 years. There was a great famine. And God didn't provide food for any of the widows in Israel. Instead, it was for a Gentile woman. And he said, in the days of Elisha the prophet, there were many lepers in Israel, but none of them were cured. Only Naaman the Syrian Oh, at that, the men and the women of the synagogue got furious with Jesus and angry because he basically called them out in front of everybody. And so they grabbed him and ran him out of the synagogue, and they ran him right up to the edge of the cliff that the city is on, and they went to throw him off the cliff. And when they got to the edge of the cliff, they suddenly realized he wasn't with them. See, as the mob had grabbed Jesus and started running towards the cliff, well, he just turned away from them and walked right through the crowd, and none of them really figured out that he had walked away, because it wasn't his time, and this wasn't the way, and God had other plans. So they were quite bewildered when they got to the edge of the cliff, and Jesus walked away from Nazareth and went on to Capernaum, a place down by the Sea of Galilee, where many important things were about to happen. And that's the end of our story for this week. Funny, isn't it? You would think that the people who grew up with Jesus would be happy to see him, happy to hear what he would have to say, and would listen. I mean, they knew him, right? But because they remembered what he was like when he was small, they couldn't hear what he was saying when he was tall. I wonder how often we judge other people by how they behaved in the past and can't hear what they're saying today. Something to think about. Go back and listen to our story again, please, and then we'll ask some questions about it, okay? I'll wait. Go back and start it all over and listen one more time. Okay, so our questions for today. First off, what pleased you? What did you like about this story? And maybe it's easier to answer the second question, what displeased you? What did you not like about this story? The third question asks, what does this story tell us about people? What people are like? Now remember, there's the royal official who believed, and all the people that Jesus grew up with who didn't believe. I wonder how that made Jesus' family feel too. What does it tell us about people? What does this story tell us about God? What God is like? How did Jesus respond when the people didn't believe him? What did he do when they tried to throw him off a cliff? What is God like? Question number 5, what touched you about this story? What meant the most to you? Question number 6 asks, what should I do differently because of this story? I should what? And remember, think of the royal official and think of how Jesus behaved when his people from his hometown didn't appreciate what he had to say. And the last question is, who should I tell this story to? Now remember, it can't be someone who's just sitting there watching the story with you. It's got to be someone else. I look forward to seeing your answers down in the comments field, and I look forward to seeing you next week for another Children's Church.